Hi there, this is a video that goes into detail about how I make small-scale missions for around 3 to 6 players in Arma 3. To start off, there are a couple of key mods that I use to help with this process, and all of them will be linked in the description of this video. 3DIN Enhanced adds functionality to the Eden editor all on its own that allow me to create specific objective types and populate the mission area with AI much easier than in the vanilla base game. Lamb's Danger.fsm is a mod that greatly improves AI behavior, and it has a dependency of CBA A3 or community-based add-ons for Arma 3, which is used by the community for modding functionality and to maintain mod compatibility. For example, another one of the mods I will be mentioning that uses CBA A3 is Operation Trebuchet, or Optra for short. And this is an entirely custom-made total modification mod that brings the Halo universe into Arma 3, and its add-on First Contact, which adds the Covenant faction. I will be using these two mods mainly for any enemies, and also as an easy way to create dynamic respawns, which we'll get into. Now with all of that out of the way, how do I actually create the missions? So first we need to do two things: player slots and a spawn point. To set up player slots, we go into Attributes, then Multiplayer, uncheck Enable AI, check Auto Assign Slots, then in Respawn, we're going to set this to respawn on custom position, check off Select Respawn Position, and set Respawn Delay to anything above 0. Additionally, check off the Save Loadout, then press OK. Next, to create the number of player slots we want, place down any squad in the Assets menu. In this case, I'll have a squad of 5. And we want to double click on the squad and check off playable. Note that the first place unit will always be automatically checked off as playable, and that will be the unit players control should they ever launch the mission in single player scenarios, but that isn't what we're making this for. So now, to set up respawns, you come to the Systems tab on the right, and you want to find Respawn Position under Multiplayer. Place this where a home base for players will be, or you can make a platform in the ocean, or what I normally do is I have a base composition that I can place anywhere in the ocean, courtesy of some of the community. Anyway, once you find a spot, this can act on its own as a position, but you can also simply attach this to another object or vehicle to make that the respawn position. Double click on the module and set the side to blue 4, or whichever side your players are on, and then give it a name. Now the actual functionality of players respawning is set up. We need to have players choose their loadout and enter the scenario somehow. To set up an arsenal, first we grab an object from the Assets menu like a crate, double click the object and find the Equipment Storage dropdown and check off Arsenal. Now for players to enter the mission, there are a few ways I like to do this. We can have them fly themselves with a pre-placed vehicle, teleport there, or because I have the Operation Trebuchet mod, we can use orbital drop pods as a method, and I'll explain all three. For a vehicle method, we simply spawn in an empty vehicle near where players will respawn, and make sure to set its Enable Damage checkbox in the Special States dropdown to false, at least for this initial vehicle. It's important to know that this method of insertion will require either a teleporter or the addition of respawn triggers throughout the mission, which I'll be explaining how to do as well. To set up a teleporter, you need two objects. I recommend a flagpole, as it causes the least complications for teleporting, as the position players are sent to will be the pivot of the object. Give a variable name to the object you want players to teleport to, and then inside the object you want players to interact with, the following function will create a teleporter. Next, to create a respawn trigger, you want to go to Triggers and create a trigger with your intended size. You want to make sure that in the mission this is placed over your entire objective. Next, right-click, then under Connect, click Sync to, and click on the desired respawn point nearby. Make sure it has an arsenal at each respawn to allow players to resupply on ammo. And now back to the trigger, double click and ensure that the activation is set to blue 4, or whichever side your players are on. Additionally, you can set this to Seized by blue 4 to only have the respawn be triggered when the majority of units in the trigger zone are blue 4. I'll be using that later when I go over how to create a capture zone objective. Finally, we get to orbital drop pods from the Optra mod. To set this up, all you need to do is find the HEV squad console and launch setup module, place this down, and give it any variable name, and it will create the launch console and attached pods for players. With this, players can choose a spot on the map, enter any of the pods, and then drop into the mission. This also creates an easy way for players to reinsert into the mission should they die without the need for a bunch of respawn triggers at every objective. However, either method can be used effectively depending on the mission and map being used for the scenario. Now that the mission setup is finished, we can get to the actual mission making. I like to start by creating the mission with the map markers first and planning out where each objective is, so I'll do that just for this example. Now for this mission, I have one of each objective type that I like to have in missions I create. These are an eliminate target objective, a capture zone objective, and a locate and interact objective. First, for an insert objective, I want to have a trigger with a large zone where I want the players to start from, and get a set task module from the assets menu. Set this to assigned, and later I'll sync it to the first objective. Sync the trigger to the set task module and make sure its activation is set to blue 4. Next, I'll go over how to make a kill objective. First, you need the thing players are going to be eliminating. In this case, I'll be using a stationary AA turret, but this can be used on enemy units as well to make high value targets. I'm going to give the turret a variable name and then make a trigger without any actual size since I don't need the trigger to be an area. Set the activation to blue 4, and in the condition, delete the default this argument and put exclamation mark alive and then the earlier variable name. Now when the turret is destroyed, it will activate the trigger, and now we need to set up the task for players. I'm going to get the create task and set task module from the assets menu. For all of the create task modules I'll be using, we're going to set the owner to blue 4, give it a title, and then uncheck the show notification. You can also set the task type to an icon relevant to the objective and action we want players to do. Next, to have the trigger complete this objective, we'll be using the set task module from earlier, and set that to succeeded. Now we sync the trigger to the set task module and the set task module to the create task module. Now when the turret is destroyed, the mission task will be completed, and if I attach the trigger to another set task module for the next objective, this time set to assigned, this is how we can chain mission objectives together. As mentioned earlier, to create a capture zone, we use the same setup with the task modules, but using a trigger with an area that has the activation set to seized by blue 4. Next, to create a locate and interact objective, we get an empty object like this rugged terminal, and instead of using the set task state modules like the others, we need to set the state manually. So in this case, inside the create task for the current objectives as well as the following objective, we will enter unique variable names into the task ID box. That is what we're going to call to change the task state. Now back inside your interact object under the hold action dropdown, enter a name for what the action is. Then in the code complete box, we will use the following line to set the current task to completed and the next one to assigned. Also note that you can set relevant icons and the duration for how long players have to hold their interact key to complete the script. So now that we have all of our objectives made, we need to populate the mission with enemies. This is done by creating squads of any faction. In this case, I'll be using the URF faction from Optra. Units can be manually placed or set to specific positions by selecting them all and then using the garrison function. And it should be noted that any vehicles should be placed manually. To do this, select all the units you want garrisoned and then right-click on one. Go to Other Tools and select Garrison Buildings. This creates an area that looks like a trigger but is being used as a zone that detects garrison spots in buildings. I like to set this to random positions, highlight all of the buildings with the zone, and then press OK a few times to randomize the enemy positions. Once satisfied, press the Cancel to close the window. This will not undo any actions. Make sure if you have enemy units garrisoned that you now ungroup them all by selecting all units and then pressing Ctrl and drag clicking off of them to create individual squads. This prevents them from moving around after the mission has already started. It should be noted that the squad limit for each faction is 255, and this may prevent you from placing more units. If I reach the limit and need more enemies, I'll usually reassign groups to some enemies that are in the same house so they don't move very far. So most of the mission is set up now, but we need a way for players to end the scenario and extract once they've completed all the main objectives. To do this, I create a helicopter extract with an AI that lands for about 30 seconds and then takes the players into a trigger that ends the mission using the end scenario module. To create an extract zone, you'll need two tasks. One for players to get through that will use a trigger to signal an incoming helicopter using this show/hide module, and another to have as a final placeholder. I'll be connecting the trigger with the end scenario to this final objective and having it succeed with the set task module. I will be attaching the trigger that's attached to the end task scenario to a set task that sets this final placeholder task to succeed it. To set up the helicopter, place it far enough away from the extraction point for players to not notice it appear, and sync the two show/hide modules to it. One of them will be set to hide and the other to show. At the extraction point, sync the trigger used for the tasks when players arrive to the module that's set to show, and this will have the helicopter appear as well when they arrive. We can select the helicopter and press Shift then right-click to make a waypoint for it. We will need 4 waypoints, one to approach the landing area, one to land, another to load, and the last one to fly away into the trigger that ends the mission. We're going to change those second and third waypoints into a different type of marker inside the dropdown. Land will be set to advanced and then land, and the load waypoint will be set under default and then load. The delay is in the bottom of the menu in the land waypoint, and this should have all 3 values set to the same unless you desire randomized time. In this example, I just have 30 seconds. And those are the basics of how I make missions in Arma 3 for me and my friends to play. Thanks for watching.